Happy Palm Sunday, everyone. I was going to give you a little description of what it was, but both Clint and Miguel just did my job for me. So don't you love when that happens? I will admit, I had a moment of deep delusion this morning. I was dead asleep last night. I was getting some great REM cycle in, and I was like, today is going to be so awesome. Clint is going to do such a good job preaching, and I can't wait for next week. After I had spent literally the entire week prepping for this and tirelessly writing a sermon, I thought, it's not April 13th. It can't be. And I woke up in my moment of panic and I said, oh my goodness, I have to preach today. And then remembered I'd already written the whole sermon. So here we are. This is the last week of our teaching series that we have been doing here at Midtown called reTHINK Everything, where we have taken a deep dive into the biblical idea of repentance. At its heart, repentance is about rethinking or re-seeing the world in an entirely different way, allowing our perspective to be utterly transformed by Jesus. We are called to turn from going in the direction that the world or our culture tells us to go and to make a complete 180 to walk towards something different to reshape our lives. And that something is Jesus. We've explored this in the past 7 weeks by looking at topics like the things that we need to unlearn and relearn, or ways in which that we need to die, ways in which that we're sick and we need healing, and how we have to fight against being shaped by self instead of being shaped by Christ. And today, to wrap up our series, we are going to be talking about what I would argue is the most difficult topic of all for me personally, and that is the topic of forgiveness. There is a lot that we need to unlearn about what our culture tells us about forgiveness, and we need to relearn what God has to say about it. And this is a topic that I have had to grapple with really heavily in more recent years because of a tragedy that happened in my life that not a lot of people know about. It's something that is a difficult topic to talk about, but I figured that there wasn't a better time to talk about it than in a series about forgiveness. So I want to take you back to December 1st, 2020. I had just moved to Michigan in August, and I was living in a tiny little apartment in Lansing, Michigan, working in a campus ministry at Michigan State University. I was freezing my poor little Arizona butt off in there. The windows were poorly insulated. I kept my heat at 63 and still paid like $500 a month in electric. I was not having a fun time. We were in the middle of COVID restrictions as well, so I really had no friends and no opportunity to go make friends because Michigan was completely shut down. It's one of the more strict states. I would argue that it was probably the worst season of my life, and I really didn't have much going on. And in the middle of this season, I get a call from one of my friends back home here in Phoenix, and he asked me if I had heard what happened to Kim. He said that there had been a really big car accident. And Kim Sorg was one of my friends from growing up. We went to middle and high school together. She was one of the most well-liked people in our community. She was kind and thoughtful and full of life, and one of the most fun people that I knew. My friend told me that she was in critical condition and headed to the hospital and asked me to pray for her. I kept asking for updates, but it didn't take long to find out that she had died shortly after she arrived at the hospital. And the worst season of my life just got a whole lot worse as I had to grieve the loss of someone special, not only to me, but to my whole community. And just when I thought the news couldn't get any worse, the details of the crash got released on the news. Kim's car got hit less than a mile from my house, with the perpetrator hitting them going 96 miles per hour in a 40 mile per hour zone. He was drunk, and he had a blood alcohol content of 0.32, which is 4 times the legal limit. And when I scrolled down in the article and I got to the name and the picture of who was responsible, I'll never forget it. My heart essentially fell out of my chest. Said in quotes, the driver was identified by Phoenix police as Lex Christopher Curry. And Lex was another friend of mine in the same friend group. Not only was Kimmy dead, but it was one of our friends who had killed her. Lex had recently lost his closest friend to an overdose earlier that year, and he just never was able to recover afterwards. A lot of my friends reached out to him and tried to help him, but he couldn't be helped, and they watched him slowly spiral into a place where he was abusing drugs and alcohol, and that is what led him to this terrible decision to drive when he was completely hammered. I knew in my heart that Lex had lost his best friend, and I really wanted to have compassion for him. But how on earth was I supposed to forgive him for what he did? He was irresponsible, careless, and it cost our community someone that we all really, really loved. And in the depth of my pain, I really didn't know what to do but to look to God and look to the scriptures. And in a lot of Christian spaces, you will hear these cheesy sort of, well, why don't you just go read the Bible and pray about it? And it's supposed to be this uplifting, really sweet thing. And I experienced the complete opposite. In the depth of your pain and your anguish, you genuinely have nowhere else to turn. And you don't know what to do. So you run to God and you ask, why? How am I supposed to make sense of this all? And how am I ever supposed to forgive my friend for this terrible thing? So we're going to do the same thing today, and we're going to look at a story about forgiveness to answer the questions of why it's important and why we should and how we should. We're going to walk through the story of Joseph, which happens throughout the end of Genesis in chapters 37 through 50. I was tempted to read all 14 chapters and keep you here for 2 hours. I've decided I'm not going to do that. I'm going to read some bits and pieces of the narrative and fill in the gaps as I go. But the life of Joseph is one that we have a lot to learn from, and a life that has blessed me, my journey of forgiveness. So we are going to start in chapter 37 in verse 1, and then take some breaks and keep reading. It says this: Jacob settled in the land where his father had lived as an alien, the land of Canaan. These are the descendants of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was shepherding the flock with his brothers. He was a helper to the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel, who's also Jacob in this story, Israel and Jacob are the same person, just keep that in mind, loved Joseph more than any other of his children because he was the son of his old age, and he made him an ornamented robe. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Once Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more, and he said to them, "Listen to this dream that I dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field, and suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright. Then your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us? Are you indeed to have dominion over us?" So they hated him even more because of his dreams and his words. He had another dream and told it to his brother, saying, "Look, I've had another dream. The sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me." But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, "What kind of dream is this that you have had? Shall we indeed come, I and your mother and your brothers, and bow to the ground before you?" So his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. All right, so we're off to a really great start here on the family dynamic front. We've got Jacob, who is the father of 12 brothers, who favors Joseph above all of the other brothers and gives him this special coat to wear. This is popular in pop culture, even if you've ever seen the musical Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat. This is what the story is about, and if you haven't seen the musical, go see it. All my theater people know what I'm talking about. Joseph, with his classic younger child syndrome, can't help but rub it in his brothers' faces a little bit. "Oh, you guys didn't get a coat too? This thing's pretty nice." That's crazy. And he starts dreaming all of these specific dreams where his brothers are all bowing down and he is ruling over them, and he just can't help but share. "Boys, you'll never believe this pretty weird dream that I had last night. It was pretty cool. You guys are all going to bow down to me someday. And I'm Dad's favorite, in case you forgot." Unsurprisingly, his brothers get a bit fed up with all of his antics, so they do the sensible thing later on in the story, and they conspire to kill him. say, we could take care of this problem pretty quick. Our annoying little younger brother could be gone in no time. So they have a nice meeting of the minds with all of the brothers to discuss what they would do. And thankfully, cooler heads prevailed. And they decide to just sell him into slavery instead of killing him. Well, that'll be better. We don't need to take his life. Let's just send him to a place far away, and we never have to deal with him anymore. But the blood's not on our hands, and it'll be great. So they afterwards share a nice meal together. They arrange for it to happen, and then they toast a good business, and their annoying younger brother is gone. I'm going to give some parental advice that you didn't ask for, as someone who has no children of their own. So for all of you Kidtown parents in the room, here you go. Don't be like Jacob. You should never be like Jacob. Their father had kind of ruined their lives. He built his entire life on Joseph, and he doted on him, and he elevated him above all of the other siblings. And as a result, Joseph became this prideful and deceptive and superior guy where his brothers all became angry and bitter and jealous. And in the overall narrative of Scripture, God had appointed Joseph and his brothers for very important roles. These are the brothers who would go on to represent the 12 tribes of Israel that the rest of the story would flow out of. But terrible parenting had ruined Joseph and his brothers. So we are left with questions in the beginning of this story. How is Joseph going to become wise and good so that he can use his gifts to save people? How are the brothers going to become wise and good so that they can become the basis for the community of God's people around the world? God here intervenes, and he becomes the father that they had never had. So the story continues, and Joseph gets sold into slavery in Egypt through the betrayal of his brothers. And then when he's in Egypt, he gets thrown into prison through the betrayal of his master's wife. And things are not looking very good for Joseph, but it's because of the fact that he gets thrown into prison that he gets to meet several members of the king's court. And they discern that he is a man of really great wisdom and spiritual insight, and he interprets a dream from Pharaoh, the leader of Egypt, and gets promoted to the prime minister position in Egypt as a result of this. In this dream, he foresees a great famine coming to the land, and he uses his administrative skills to prepare the nation for this great famine. So instead of death and starvation in Egypt, there's food and life abundantly available thanks to Joseph. Now, this famine had affected all of the land, so Jacob and his remaining sons that are in Canaan are affected by this famine, and they're facing starvation. So we pick up the narrative here as we fast forward to chapter 42. This is starting in verse 1 of chapter 42. It says this: When Jacob learned there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you keep looking at one another? I've heard," he said, "that there is grain in Egypt. So go down and buy grain for us there, that we may live and not die." So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt, but Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he feared that harm might come to him. Thus the sons of Israel were among the people who came to buy grain, for the famine had reached the land of Canaan. Now Joseph was governor over the land. It was he who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed themselves before him with their faces to the ground. When Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he treated them like strangers and spoke harshly to them. "Where do you come from?" he said. They said, "From the land of Canaan, to buy food." Although Joseph had recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Joseph also remembered the dreams that he had dreamed about them. He said to them, "You are spies, and you have come to see the nakedness of the land." They said to him, "No, my lord, your servants have come to buy food. We are all sons of one man. We are honest men. Your servants have never been spies." But he said to them, "No, you have come to see the nakedness of the land." And they said, "We, your servants, are 12 brothers, the sons of a certain man in the land of Canaan. The youngest, however, is now with our father, and one is no more." But Joseph said to them, "It is as I have said to you, you are spies. Here is how you shall be tested. As Pharaoh lives, you shall not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Let one of you go and bring your brother, while the rest of you remain in prison, in order that your words may be tested, whether there is truth in you or else. As Pharaoh lives, surely you are spies." And he put them all together in prison for 3 days. All right, as we can see from the beginning of this story, family dynamics have not improved much since Joseph was sold off. Jacob so eloquently tells all of his sons, "What are you clowns doing just looking at each other? Go down and get some grain so that we don't die. We are going to die if you do not go get food." But he doesn't send Benjamin, who is the youngest brother of all of them, because he doesn't trust them after he has already lost Joseph. He doesn't know how Joseph has been lost, but he is grieving the loss of a son still. And he won't risk sending his youngest son with them. When the brothers arrive in Egypt to get their grain sacks filled, of course, Joseph recognizes them, but they do not recognize him. And this isn't particularly surprising, considering the last time that they would have seen him is when he was a teenager. But Joseph remembers the dream, and he accuses them of being spies, saying that they've been sent from a hostile country to stake out the land. The brothers deny this accusation and insist that they are 12 brothers of one father from Canaan, just coming to get a little food. It's just that our youngest brother isn't with us, and one of our brothers is kind of gone. You want to talk about some great irony there. I think if I were Joseph in this situation, I would have had a tough time not asking, oh, one of your brothers isn't with you. What happened to him? That's really tragic. I'm so sorry for you, not knowing that they stand right in front of him. So Joseph throws them into prison. And what happens after this story that picks up is that Joseph has some second thoughts, and he decides to let all of his brothers out of prison. And he says, I've been thinking maybe we could go a different route. Since you know that we love a good impersonation here at Midtown, Joseph gives his best mob boss, and he says, I'm a reasonable guy. What if we made a deal, huh? And he says, why don't you I'm going to fill your bags. I'm going to fill your bags with grain, and I'm going to let you all go home on the condition that I can keep one of the brothers, and the next time that you come back to get your grain filled, bring Benjamin with you, so that I know you're telling the truth, and then we'll release your other brother from prison, and you can all go, and we'll know that you're not spies. So the brothers accept this offer, and they go on their way, and they get back to Canaan, and they tell Jacob what had happened. And he very adamantly says that he will never give them Benjamin. He is not going to let his youngest son go back to Egypt. But the years go on, and the food starts running thin. So they're desperate, and they really need food. So Jacob finally relents, and he decides to send Benjamin with the brothers to Egypt. And they come back before Joseph again, who gives them more grain. And they are on their way out of town to head back to Canaan when a messenger from Joseph's court catches up to them and says that one of them has stolen the royal silver cup. So he opens up everyone's sack and he searches for the cup and all of their bags of grain, and he finds the cup in Benjamin's bag. So they bring the brothers back before Joseph, and they all fall on their face, and they say, we are your slaves. And Joseph says, no, it's okay. I only need one of you. I want the one who had the cup in his bag, Benjamin, your youngest brother. I'm going to keep him. He has to stay, and he's going to be a slave. The rest of you are totally free to go. There's another great ironic connection in this part of the story is that Joseph is essentially giving his brothers the same opportunity to do to Benjamin what they had done to him. We will see if the brothers have really grown or not, or if they're inclined to just cut their losses, get rid of Benjamin. It's like, well, we still got 10 brothers left. We can leave him behind. We'll go back with our food. Everything will be great. But their answer to Joseph's demands here is actually surprising, and it shows some growth on their end. One of the brothers, Judah, steps forward and makes Joseph an offer, and he says, no, please, keep me instead of Benjamin. My father could not bear to be without his youngest son, and if we do not bring him back, our father will surely die. Jacob, already having grieved the loss of Joseph, couldn't stand to lose Joseph's younger brother too, so Judah makes a plea to take his spot. The great irony here is that Judah was actually the ringleader of the original plan to sell Joseph into slavery with all of the brothers. And another great irony for you is that Jesus comes from the line of Judah. So just as Judah steps forward and he offers himself in this scenario to take Benjamin's place, Jesus too will offer up his life for many, many people in the days to come. So Joseph, upon hearing this offer and seeing the change in his brothers, cannot contain himself any longer, and he responds. So we pick up here in Genesis chapter 45, starting in verse 1. It says, then Joseph could no longer control himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, send everyone away from me. So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? But his brothers could not answer him, so dismayed were they at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, come closer to me. And they came closer. He said, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves, because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are 5 more years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh and lord of all his house and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not delay. Unsurprisingly, his brothers are quite speechless upon hearing this news. Not only does their brother, who they sold into slavery a long time ago, live, but he is the prime minister of Egypt. And in a shocking turn of events, he tells his brothers not to be angry that they sold him into slavery because of all the good that has come from it. And he invites them to move to Egypt, where they can survive and have their needs met. Joseph promises to take care of them. And afterwards, he throws his arms around Benjamin, and they weep on each other in this really tender and intimate moment. As the story continues, the brothers make it back to Canaan, and they tell their father that Joseph lives. And Jacob can't believe it, and he sets out to see Joseph before he dies. He and his sons take off for Egypt and settle there, where they are taken care of during the famine by Joseph's leadership. Eventually, Jacob knows his time is coming to an end, and he meets with each of his sons to give them a blessing before he departs. Jacob dies, and the brothers all go to bury him in Canaan before they return to Egypt, which takes us to the final part of our story here. This is Genesis chapter 50, verses 15 through 21. It says this, realizing that their father was dead, Joseph's brothers said, what if Joseph still bears a grudge against us and pays us back in full for all the wrong that we did to him? So they approached Joseph, saying, your father gave this instruction before he died. Say to Joseph, I beg you, forgive the crime of your brothers and the wrong they did in harming you. Now therefore, please forgive the crime of the servants of the God of your father. Joseph wept when they spoke to him, and his brothers also wept, fell down before him, and said, we are here as your slaves. But Joseph said to them, do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God? Even though you intended to do harm to me, God intended it for good, in order to preserve numerous people, as he is doing today. So have no fear. I myself will provide for you and your little ones. In this way he reassured them, speaking kindly to them. The way that this story wraps up is so fascinating for so many reasons, and I had to skip over a lot of details, but hopefully you tracked with me and got the gist of it. First, in this last exchange here, his brothers are terrified that despite Joseph's kindness up to this point, now is going to be the time for vengeance. Notice what they said to him. They say, your father. Your father told us, basically, what is this? Dad said to be nice to us. Please don't hurt us. We really, remember, we don't want to dishonor his legacy. He told us to give you this message. You should really be nice to us. We're really sorry. But Joseph is not after retribution here. He weeps with them. And they fall down before his feet again, and they say again, we're your slaves and we're under your service. We'll do whatever you want. And Joseph's response here is so beautiful. He asks, am I in the place of God? In other words, does judgment belong to me? He doesn't try to sit in the chair of God and be something that he's not. Rather, he has the humility to recognize that God has done a miraculous work in the midst of his terrible circumstances, and he's used Joseph's life to save the lives of countless others. He delivers one of the most famous lines in the whole Bible. It's a sentiment that has been shared by Christians all around the world for generations. What you intended for evil, God intended for good. It's a response that, if I'm honest and I really do some self-reflection, I don't know that I ever would have been able to have in that moment. Because the culture that I have grown up in has told me that people who have wronged me deserve to be repaid and that I should be actively preying on their downfall. It says that justice belongs to me and I should go to really extreme lengths at getting it. It's almost like God knows us and created us and understands human nature or something. So he really explicitly states this in the Word. In Romans 12:19, it says, "Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, 'Vengeance is mine, I will repay,' says the Lord." And the reality is this, friends. If you try to beat an evildoer by paying them back or seeking vengeance, by trying to win, you're actually the one who loses. If you repay evil with evil, you become evil yourself. It's essentially the whole plot to one of everyone's favorite movies and books, Lord of the Rings. There's this really great, terrible ring of power that gets forged by this Dark Lord. But if you take the ring of power to defeat the Dark Lord, even in the interest of justice, you become the Dark Lord. In winning, you lose. The only way that you actually win is by throwing the ring into the lake of fire. What an incredibly powerful metaphor for forgiveness. Every one of us in this room lives in a broken world, and every one of us has a broken soul. I know that intimately well about myself. There are things that are very wrong with me. I could give you a whole laundry list. And there are things that are very wrong with you too. In our souls, there is a foolishness that causes us to do really dumb and destructive things. There's a blindness to who we are and to who others are. There's a cowardice and a fear that cripples us. There's selfishness and a focus to turn to our own self-interests. But the claim is this, that if you trust God and you turn to him, God becomes your Father. And he begins to nurture you. And he brings this external brokenness of the world into a relationship with the internal brokenness of your own life in such a way that it teaches you. And it wakes you up, and it strengthens you, and it heals you, and it gives you the power to become a completely different person. A person who can forgive, even in the most egregious circumstances. It really is profound to look at what God did with Joseph. Joseph was a total turd, and he was totally full of himself. I mean, those first chapters are not pretty. But even though he was kind of a jerk, he had every reason to be deeply hurt by the betrayal that he faced from his brothers. He didn't deserve that. And it would have been easily justifiable for him to get retribution by enslaving his brothers and throwing them in prison, just like what had been done to him, or even just killing them. He didn't deserve the evil that he encountered, and nor was that evil created by God. It was the choice of foolish humans who put him there. But God used that evil to move Joseph from a place of foolishness to wisdom, from cowardice into courage, from blindness of who he was and to self-knowledge and discovery, and from selfishness to a rich compassion and care for others. Ultimately, from bitterness and resentment to forgiveness. I think we all like the idea of forgiveness. It sounds great. It's generally the right thing to do. We've probably heard our parents talk about it, or we've heard it in pop culture, at least to some degree, that forgiveness is great. And I think we love the idea of it until something deeply personal happens to us, and then it's not so easy, and it doesn't sound so great anymore. So I think it's always helpful to look at some practical frameworks for how we can actually do this well. Desmond Tutu's book of Forgiving is a great example. He was a bishop and a theologian in South Africa during apartheid and lived through decades of segregation and violence done to his community. I would highly recommend this book of Forgiving. It's a really, really great read with some profound insights. In it, he lists 4 parts to forgiveness as a framework that he can follow. If you can put it up on the screen behind me. The first of this framework is that we need to tell the story. We need to speak the facts of the things that have happened, and to do this with a trusted loved one, someone that we really can rely on. And consider, even if possible, to tell this story with the person who has caused us the hurt or the harm. I say consider because that isn't always possible, and reality is that in situations of abuse where safety is a concern, you are never going to have the opportunity to do that, and I wouldn't advise doing that. But if you have the opportunity to, it's great to be able to tell the story to the person, and if not, to tell the story to your most trusted people. Secondly, we have to name the hurt. Identifying the feelings is the most important part of the process, and they're part of the facts. Anger and sadness and grief and all of the things that come up are all okay, and we don't want to overlook them and brush through them as if they have no relevance to the story and that we only need to focus on the facts. The fact is that you were hurt and really hard things happened, and it's okay to acknowledge that. This is a long and a slow and hard process, and it might take years, and that's okay. Bring all of those emotions and those challenges to God and to trusted others as you go through this process. Third, we are to grant forgiveness. The most important thing to remember here is that this is a choice. I can only choose this for myself, and you can only choose it for you. It is up to you to decide what to do with your story and your hurt. And there are some really wonderful people here in this room who would be happy to walk through it with you. You are not alone, friends, as you walk through this. When we grant forgiveness, it undoes these chains that bind us to the person who hurt us. Healing and restoration comes on the other end when we're able to tell a new story. And lastly, we need to renew or release the relationship. Renewal is always the preference. It's great if you are able to share with the person who hurt you and reconcile and come to a new place, but that's not always possible. And sometimes release is necessary because of your own safety and health and well-being. But this framework is something that I've found incredibly helpful to follow in my own journey. An example of seeing this framework come to pass is Bishop Malusi Pulwana. He was arrested and tortured in South Africa for fighting against segregation and genocide during apartheid. And rather than sparking him to revenge, it sparked him to forgiveness. And in the midst of his torture, he reported this insight. He says, quote, "These are God's children, and they are losing their humanity. We have to help them recover it." He has since committed his life to bringing restoration across lines of oppression by serving as the General Secretary of the South African Council of Churches, spearheading its work to lead common Christian actions that work for moral witness in South Africa, addressing issues of social and economic justice, national reconciliation, the integrity of creation, eradication of poverty, and contributing towards the empowerment of those who are spiritually, socially, and economically marginalized. Friends, we never choose to get hurt, but we do choose what we'll do with that hurt. And hurt people hurt people. They're going to hurt people. But forgiven people forgive people. We have such great examples of that in Joseph and Bishop Malawi here. The reality is, I am never going to know why my friend Kim had to die, and why my friend Lex chose the path that he did. And if I spend all my days trying to find the answer to that, I will drive myself mad because I can never understand why. I can't spend my time looking outside at all of the external circumstances when something terrible happens. I have to look inside. Because the only good that ever comes out of anything bad that happens is if I actually take the time to reflect on the fact that God is making me into this beautiful and unique person that he has designed me to be. And as I have learned how to forgive Lex through many years of failure and tears and grief, I have seen God transform me into a person who looks just a little bit more like Jesus. It has not been pretty, I can assure you of that. It hasn't been simple, and there are days that I still feel the crushing weight of the tragedy that happened and the terrible loss. But God has used tragedy as a vehicle in my life and the life of my community to bring us to a different place. This all culminated about a month ago in a really sweet, surprising encounter where I bumped into one of my old friends from high school at a birthday party who I hadn't seen in 10 years. And she was a really, really good friend of Kim's. And it was so great to chat and catch up. And I saw she had a huge K tattooed on her arm. And I was like, this has to be for Kim, right? And we just got to share stories and sweet memories that we had of her and talk about how much her death has changed our perspective on certain things. It was truly one of the sweetest, most healing moments for me, and a reminder that God has been at work in the last 5 years. Forgiveness is hard. And to close, I really want to invite you into the story of Holy Week. Today on Palm Sunday, as we heard, Jesus has arrived triumphantly in Jerusalem to celebrate Passover. And he's greeted by a crowd who's acclaiming him by waving palm branches and laying down cloaks to honor him. And in the great reversal, some of these people who cheered during his arrival would soon be cheering for his crucifixion. One of the 12 people in Jesus' inner circle will be the one who betrays him. Jesus, who is betrayed by the very people who were supposed to love him and worship him, is left to experience the most brutal death for a crime that he wasn't even guilty of. And for all of the people responsible for putting him up on a cross to die, he says the words, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." That is the God that we serve, friends. A God of radical forgiveness. So I invite you to join me this week and to lean into this story and engage with it with fresh eyes as we learn a little bit more about the forgiving nature of our Lord. Let's pray.